Hello, Harvest. I am so excited to be a part of our annual assembly 2024, where our theme is Shift, Live, and Lead with Clarity. My name is Dr. Renae Symonette, and I would like to encourage you today to trust God through all of the shifting times that are happening in your life. You know, in middle school, there was a very sophisticated way to determine if someone wanted to be your boyfriend or your girlfriend. We'd just send a note. And the note was usually carried by a trusted friend who would deliver the precious cargo while avoiding the scanning eyes of the teacher. The note simply read, "Do you like me?" And below were a series of boxes, yes, no, and maybe. And your job was to mark the appropriate box and get the message back to the trusted carrier. And depending on the box you marked, it either made someone's day or it broke their heart. The young boy or girl had to decide, am I ready to shift from being single or going steady? You know, transitions in life are really easy. They mean that one part of your life is over and you are about to shift to a new part. We walk through transitions in order to grow. And as we walk through them, it's hard to see what's coming next. The territory is just unknown. So we often put our attention and focus on the transition rather than where we're being transitioned to. How do we trust God through the shifting periods of our life, through the changes, through the transitions? I want to talk to you today about 5 ways that you can do that. Step 1, we've got to change our mindset. Our first step to trusting God is doing that. If you're thinking the same, nothing will change. Nothing is more powerful than a changed mind. The right mindset says, look ahead. You know where you're going. You may be limited, but our God is unlimited. You've got to get a new mindset. Isaiah chapter 55 verses 8 through 9 says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways. For as high as the heavens are from the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. We have to believe God for good things. God is greater than our problem. So don't let this small thinking limit you. You need to develop a mustard seed faith and think God thoughts. The shift or the victory will start in your mind. 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul writes to Timothy to encourage him to be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, emphasizing to him to remain diligent in all things. You know, I like Paul. Paul did his job. He had convictions. He wanted to stop the perversion of the gospel from creeping into the church. He wanted to stop the disunity among the believers. His primary goal and convictions was to warn the church to beware of false teachers. Paul's passion was the gospel and keeping it pure. And when he saw the church was not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, he responded. He went on his missionary journey and he encouraged the leaders. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8 and 9, he said, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Paul, I call him a passionate defender. He faced the worst of all hardships. So he wanted to encourage Timothy to stand strong in his faith with his reliance on the written word of God. By writing his own endurance in hardship, Paul stresses the need to be true to the Lord by telling Timothy how to think like a leader and trust God through the shifting times in his life. Proverbs 3, verse 5 through 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. We have got to change our mindset. Secondly, we've got to know God's timing is best. Being in God's waiting room is not easy. When I faced a storm in my life, I was not happy. It was unexpected and I didn't have time to plan, so it felt very chaotic. I didn't know what God was doing at the time. I really didn't. I didn't know that he was transitioning me to allow me to work alongside my father for the last 2 years of his life. I didn't know I was going to help in his church to raise up new leaders for the next 5 years of my life. The shift came, but I had to trust God through it. I never knew how powerful it was to trust him. That 5-letter word, T-R-U-S-T. Acts 1:7 says, "And he said to them, it is not for you to know the time or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority. He knows when the seasons will shift, when your career will take off, when you will be married, for some of us that are single, when that bad relationship will end, when you win the lottery." Bold prayers are what you need to pray. You need to be courageous. Be vulnerable when you pour yourself out to God. He will make a way for you, but it will happen in his time. You need to get into agreement with God. He will give you an abundant life that's full and overflowing, but not when you want it. The book of Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 6 says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you. He will not forsake you." God never forgets. He never ceases to care. His word says, "I know the plans I have for you. They're to prosper you. They're not to harm you. They are to give you hope and a future." He has your name engraved in the palm of his hands. No matter the storm, he will never leave you alone. So be patient, for God's timing requires your trust. You don't know when, but you do know that his timing is perfect. He is your vindicator, and you are not invisible to him. He can see you. You will know when you're in God's waiting room. Trust me, you will. It's quite uncomfortable. While waiting, we have to trust him. When God delays, sometimes, we feel forgotten. Sometimes it's just not his timing, and sometimes it's just not his will. Isaiah chapter 43 verse 19 says, "Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Don't you perceive it? It will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." We have to know God's timing is best. The third way we can put trust in our God: avoid comparing our race with others. J.B. Phillips said, "If God was small enough for us to figure out, he wouldn't be big enough for us to worship." So as we trust God through the shift, we need to have faith for our own race. Faith simply is hanging on to God when our life is falling apart. Being a Christian does not make us immune from suffering. The unbeliever's life is on sinking sand, and we as believers stand on the rock, who is Jesus Christ. There's a Sunday school song that I will never forget. It says, "The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rain came tumbling down. And when that rain fell, that house stood strong." But the song also goes on to say, "The foolish man built his house on the sand, and his house fell flat." So I want to encourage you, stand firm on the rock called Jesus Christ. Let's endure hardship like good soldiers and remain diligent as servants of the Lord. Let's not watch other people. It's like an athlete in a race. If he or she is concentrating on the other runners, they end up losing. So focus on your race so you can win your own prize. When we learn to trust God, he always keeps his promises. He is working on us. He's building character. He's preparing us. He's testing us. And when everything is changing, it is good to turn to the Bible and remind ourselves that God is the same yesterday, today, and he will be the same forever. In our text, 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul encourages Timothy to lead the church in prayer and to be loyal in faith. He says, "Know that God will help you. Be wary of false teachers and know that it won't be easy." 3 important tips that we ought to remember. In a nutshell, the theme of 2 Timothy is Christ-centered godliness for the sake of the gospel. It's individual, for me and for you. Paul encourages personal godliness, Christ-infused godliness. We must not only persevere and remain faithful, but it is essential that we continue to proclaim the gospel to a lost world. And as we trust God through the shift, Don't get impatient, wanting things right now. He intends to bless you. However, we must trust him because God's timing is not ours. It's just a delay. It's not a denial. Wait on him. Philippians 4:6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." We should not compare our race with others. Next, we should embrace the change we're walking through. God's character can be described as compassionate, gracious, steadfast, reliable, stable, and the list can just go on. He stands for truth. He is a rock. He's just, and he's upright. When the children of Israel's kingdom collapsed because they had forgotten about God and what he had done for them, they found themselves without a home and without a king. So they cried out to God, "Didn't you make a promise to us through our servants David and Abraham?" They were accusing God of abandoning them about the promise he made. And they found themselves asking, is God trustworthy? Yes, God did make a covenant with Abraham and David, but he also made a covenant with Noah and with Moses. But God made that covenant with the prophets because they trusted him. Those prophets made them sacrifices in their lives and vowed to serve God. So he remained faithful to them because they remained faithful to him. Unlike the Israelites who turned their back on God and worshiped other gods, God wanted them to trust him. They did not embrace the change they were walking through. They lost their way. So God allowed them to lose their land, and the Assyrians was able to take it. God made his covenant with men who trusted him all through the shifts that they encountered in their lives. They embraced the change they were walking through. They knew trusting God was risky, but they also knew that God's promise never fails. He shows love to his children, and they knew that they could trust that. As leaders, we can make progress by being who God has called us to be. And when the times get rough or we go off course, we can trust God through the shifts that happen in our lives. Can I encourage you to be strong in the grace of God? He may be calling you to serve. He may be calling you to come out of the shadows and into the light, to lead. He may be calling you to form a church plant. He may be calling you to create a new vision for your home or your family. Whatever it is, it's time to make that shift. James 1:17 says, "Every good gift and every perfect gift are from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." The gift he gave you is perfectly suited for your purpose. Use it as you're walking through the change. Finally, understand the season you're in. You will need clarity on what season you are in. Direct your attention to God. Lift your focus to him and what he can do, not the limitations of your ability or your circumstances, but what God can do. As you focus on his power and purposes, ask him to open the eyes of your heart so you can know his purposes and know his will. Ephesians 1:18 says, "I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his inheritance, and his holy people." 99% of the time, God's communication with you is going to be internal. It's going to be in your mind, in your heart, in your soul. So ask God to show you what his will is during the seasons of your life. Pay attention to where he's answering. Pay attention to where he's leading you. Our actions and our attitudes during these times of preparation, these times of sowing, these times of believing, these times of persevering determines whether God will shift us into a time of new strategic opportunities. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 1 says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every purpose under the heavens." What season are you in right now? There's a story. It's told of a beekeeper. He explained how in the beehive, when a little bee is in its first stage, it is put into a hexagonal cell and it's given enough honey for its use until it reaches maturity. The honey is sealed in a capsule of wax, and when the tiny bee has fed itself on the honey and exhausted the supply, that means the time has come for it to emerge into the open. But in order to do that, the bee has to wrestle its way out. The tussle, the straining to get through that wax, it is the shifting time for that bee. So his new season starts in the agony of his exit. During that exit, the bee rubs off the membrane that hides its wings, and on the other side, it is able to fly. Without any strain or trouble, that bee would not be able to fly. As you struggle to figure out what season you're in, and as you struggle to get to the next stage of your life, don't forget to trust God. You're going to need Him to get through your season. Don't give up. Your struggles won't be wasted. They are necessary. Like the bee, when you come through the struggle and the tussle, it will reveal your wings, and you will be able to fly. The key? Don't quit. When God shifts us during difficult times in our lives, it doesn't mean that the process and the fight of faith are finished. It means we have shifted into a very strategic season, but we're not yet done being fruitful. We still need to persevere. Know when to shift. God's time is moving forward hour by hour, minute by minute. When we respond to God's call in our life, He leads us through the shift. Can I encourage you today? Don't give up. Keep fighting. Fight that good fight of faith. Things won't always make sense. Trust me, I know. But keep running the race with perseverance. Trust God through the shift. Change your mindset. Know His timing's best. Avoid comparing your race with others. Embrace the changes that you're walking through and understand the season you're in. Make that shift today. May God bless you.